Chapter 57. He kneels emotionally. The rain wasn't a storm tonight. It was a rhythmic, silver curtain that turned the world outside our windows into a blurred watercolor. I stood in the center of our living room in the Hamptons, the house with the big windows. The space was still sparsely furnished, a few crates yet to be unpacked, but it felt more like a home than the Blackwood penthouse ever had. There was a scent of cedar, sea salt, and the lingering fragrance of the jasmine tea Maya had made before retiring to her study. I looked at my hands. They were empty. No phone buzzing with market alerts, no tablet with legal briefs, no mahogany desk to anchor my authority. According to the Global Medical Ethics Board, I was a ghost. I was barred from the labs, forbidden from the boardroom, and stripped of my executive status. To the financial world, Alexander Blackwood was a cautionary tale, the titan who fell for the sterling sting. And yet, as I stood there in the quiet, I felt a sense of gravity that was heavier than any net worth. I walked toward Maya's study. The door was slightly ajar, a sliver of warm, amber light spilling onto the hallway floor. I stopped, watching her through the gap. She was hunched over a laptop, her brow furrowed in concentration, the gold ring on her finger catching the light as she typed. She was the CEO of a global revolution. She was the woman who had conquered the man who owned the room. And I realized, in that moment, that I had never truly lived until she broke me. The steward was a mask I had worn to protect a hollow core. I had spent my life thinking that love was a variable to be secured, a contract to be enforced. But Maya had taught me that love was the only thing you couldn't lock in. You had to let it breathe, or it would suffocate. I felt a sudden, sharp need to tell her, not as a husband and not as a partner. I needed to tell her as the man who had almost lost his soul to a locked-in clause. I pushed the door open. It creaked softly, and she looked up. Her hazel eyes softened instantly when they found mine, the sharp, CEO edge melting into a look of such absolute, unshielded tenderness that it made my heart ache. "Alexander, is something wrong?" she asked, closing her laptop. "No," I said, my voice sounding thick. "Everything is finally right." I walked into the room, but I didn't stop at the desk. I didn't sit in the chair opposite her. I walked around the oak table until I was standing right beside her. I took her hand, pulling her to her feet. "Alexander." Her voice was a soft question, filled with a sudden, curious heat. I didn't answer. I didn't have the words yet. I just looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the strength in her jaw, the fire in her eyes, and the sheer, undeniable beauty of the woman who had stood in the rain and refused to be a victim. And then, I did the one thing a Blackwood was taught never to do. I knelt. Maya POV. My breath hitched. Alexander wasn't kneeling for a proposal. We were already married. He wasn't kneeling to fix a loose board or pick up a fallen pen. He was kneeling in front of me, his hands resting on my waist, his head bowed against my stomach. It wasn't a physical submission, it was an emotional execution. I felt the tremor in his shoulders, the rhythmic, heavy thud of his heart through the fabric of his shirt. This was a man who had faced down my father's brilliance, my mother-in-law's malice, and the world's judgment without bending an inch. But here, in the quiet of our study, he was surrendering the last of his armor. "Alexander," I whispered, my hands finding his hair, "what are you doing?" "I'm reclaiming the room, Maya," he rasped, his voice muffled against me. "But this time, I'm realizing that I don't want to own it. I just want to belong in it." He pulled back just enough to look up at me. His gray eyes were raw, filled with a vulnerability that was so intense it was almost painful to look at. I saw the steward, the titan, and the consultant all dissolve into the man, the one who had been waiting 34 years to be found. I spent my life thinking I was the master of my own fate, he continued, his grip on my waist tightening. I thought if I had the power, the money, and the contracts, I would never be lonely again. I thought I could buy safety. I thought I could secure your love like an asset. He let out a jagged, broken laugh. I was a fool. I was so busy trying to lock you in that I didn't realize I was the one trapped in the dark. You're the one who set me free, Maya. You're the one who showed me that the only thing worth having is the thing you're willing to lose. I knelt down in front of him, our knees touching on the soft rug. I took his face in my hands, my thumbs tracing the lines of exhaustion and relief that were etched into his skin. You didn't lose anything, Alexander, I said, my voice shaking. You just traded an empire for a home. I'm a shadow now, Maya. The world thinks I'm a joke, a man who gave it all away for a woman. Let them think what they want, I said, leaning in until our foreheads were touching. The world doesn't see what I see. They don't see the man who stood by my father's bed. They don't see the man who bled on a mountain to keep me safe. They don't see the man who is brave enough to kneel in his own house. I kissed him then, a slow, deep, and soul-shaking kiss that tasted of salt and the truth. It was a kiss that wiped away the last of the Blackwood taint. It was a sealing of the claim that had nothing to do with signatures or boardrooms. Alexander groaned, a low, primal sound that vibrated through my entire body. He pulled me closer, his hands sliding down to my hips, his fingers digging into the silk of my robe. The seductive tension that always simmered between us exploded into a raw, unbridled need. You own me, Maya, he whispered against my lips. In every way a man can be owned, and God, I love it. Alexander POV. The submission was the most empowering thing I had ever felt. By letting go of the need to be the titan, I had finally found the man. I picked Maya up, her legs wrapping around my waist, her arms clinging to my neck. I carried her out of the study and into the bedroom, the moonlight casting long, silver shadows across the sheets. I laid her on the bed, but I didn't move over her. I stayed on my knees at the edge of the mattress, watching her. She looked like a goddess of fire and light, her dark hair a silk spill across the white pillows, her eyes wide and searching. No more rules, I murmured, reaching out to trace the curve of her hip. No more professional distance. No more equal ground. Tonight there is only this. Only us, she breathed. The intimacy that followed was a celebration of my kneeling. I touched her with a reverence that was a form of worship. I kissed the places where the world had tried to break her, my mouth a map of the devotion I had promised. Every touch was an acknowledgement that she was the one in control, not because of a contract, but because her heart was the only thing I ever wanted to secure. I moved over her slowly, my weight a promise of the protection I would never stop providing. I met her fire with my own, a slow, deep, and absolute fusion of two souls who had survived the fallout and come out whole. In the dark of the Hamptons night, surrounded by the silence of the house we had built, we finally crossed the ultimate line. We weren't the Blackwood Sterling Titans anymore. We were just Alexander and Maya. As I claimed her, my heart finally finding its rhythm in hers, I realized that the steward hadn't died on that mountain. He had simply found a new master. And as I whispered her name into the dark, I knew that I would spend the rest of my life ensuring that she never had to kneel for anyone. Maya POV, 4 a.m. I lay in the quiet, watching the first hint of dawn touch the dunes. Alexander was asleep beside me, his arm draped across my waist in that familiar, protective grip. But it felt different now. It didn't feel like a claim, it felt like an anchor. He looked peaceful, the tension of the last decade finally erased from his face. I looked at the Vigil of Justice notebook on the nightstand. I reached out and pulled it toward me. I opened it to the very last page. Under Alexander's entry, the fear of loss, the price of a full room, I saw that he had added a new line while I was in the kitchen. He kneels, not because he is weak, but because he has finally found something worth serving. I felt a tear escape and track a path through the dark. He had done it. He had finally, truly let go of the room. I picked up the pen and wrote my own response. She claims, not because she wants power, but because she found a man brave enough to share his soul. I put the notebook back and leaned into Alexander's heat. The fallout was over. The claim was complete. The ground was equal. But as I closed my eyes, I realized that the story of the billionaire and the scientist was no longer about the fire. It was about the light, and the world was never going to be the same. Alexander POV morning. I woke up to the sound of coffee and the scent of the sea. Maya was standing at the window, a mug in her hand, her hair a messy bun, her ivory robe loose in the wind. She looked like the future. I got out of bed and walked over to her. I didn't say anything. I just wrapped my arms around her from behind and buried my face in her neck. "What are we doing today, CEO Sterling?" I asked softly. Maya turned in my arms, her hazel eyes dancing with a lethal, beautiful joy. "Today," she said, "we're going to the Sterling Research Center. I have a board meeting with the UN Commission, and I'm going to need my special consultant to provide some technical insights." I laughed, a real, rich sound that echoed through the house. I thought I was barred from the boardroom. "I'm the CEO, Alexander. I can grant an exception for my husband, as long as he promises to stay in his seat." "I'll do whatever you want, Maya," I whispered, pulling her into a kiss. "I'm yours, remember." We walked out of the bedroom, hand in hand. The locked-in era was a memory. The kneeling was our foundation. And as we stepped into our new world, I realized that I had finally achieved the ultimate Blackwood goal. I had secured the only asset that was ever truly worth keeping, and her name was Maya. Maya POV, end of chapter 57. The sun rose over Manhattan, a brilliant, unshielded gold. I looked at the ring on my finger. It was just a band of gold, but it was the strongest thing I'd ever seen. I looked at Alexander, and I saw my husband, my partner, and my equal. We were no longer locked in. We were just us, and the world was ours to explore, together. Next chapter, chapter 58, she chooses him.